Okay, good evening. It's Tuesday evening, the 30th of September 2025. Welcome to this look at developments around what will become Storm Humberto, currently Hurricane Humberto, located in the southwestern Atlantic. So I thought I'd put a little video together to help explain some of the things that are going to happen, some of the model differences, and some of the key things to look out for, what we're looking at over the next few days as the storm makes its way towards the British Isles. And it does look increasingly likely that we're going to see some pretty windy weather, to say the least, but with gales, severe gales, even storm force winds across northern parts of the country as we go into Friday and Saturday. So be aware and keep tuned to the forecast as we go through. So we'll start off looking at the bigger picture. So this is the picture of the Atlantic taken from the GOES satellite above North America, above the equator over Americas. You've got two hurricanes here. Hurricane Humberto is this one on the right, and this one is Hurricane Imelda. So it's quite unusual to get two hurricanes in such a close proximity. I think this one's about number 10 on the list of proximities which are closer. And it's Humberto, this one on the right, that we're going to talk about. As it moves northwards, it's going to lose its tropical characteristics, but it is in fact going to become a fairly potent extratropical storm. And we can see by looking at the water vapor imagery already some of the things that are kind of developing here. So Humberto to the right is not particularly it's not a particularly fierce and intense hurricane. It's losing its tropical characteristics now, and the reason for that is it's merging with this flow to the north. So these clouds moving very rapidly from west to east as high cirrus clouds, they're associated with the southern portion of the jet stream. So the jet stream is located to the north over Canada, and we can see that represented on the 200 millibar plot here by the GFS. So the GFS has a relatively good handle on developments at the moment, and Humberto is situated just about in here. So it's located to the south of the main westerly belt of jet stream winds at the high wind at 200 millibars. And what actually happens as Humberto moves northwards, it loses its tropical characteristics. The energy will be translated into extratropical energy in terms of wind in the jet stream aloft, and into a surface, deepening surface low pressure center at the surface. So you can see here, if I move forward just a little bit in terms of the sequence, you'll see what happens to the jet. So you see these colors get brighter and pinker. That is essentially where the jet stream is being invigorated by all the heat energy that is rising to the top of those thunderstorms. That heat through the tropical extratropical transition is essentially creating an intensifying thermal divide at 200 millibar, which increases the jet stream, increases the wind at that altitude. And you can see here the jet gets pretty strong. So if we look at a sounding for the GFS, you can see that the jet stream there is at 135 knots. So it's it's quite intense. 135 knot jet is pretty powerful, and that is going to help develop the storm that's going to head our way towards the end of the week. And what will happen as Humberto moves northwards, you can see it here in the I'll go back to this chart for a second. What Humberto is going to do is essentially move into the right entrance region of the jet stream to start with. The jet stream has two main developmental areas. The right entrance, which is down here, and the left exit, which is up here. The right entrance sees intensification because as the low pressure enters that, you have the wind speeding up in the jet stream ahead of it. So you think of it as a big wind tunnel. Essentially the wind aloft ahead of you is faster than the wind behind you. So it's going to speed up and push out very rapidly. So that causes the low pressure center in here to develop. And then in the left exit region, you also get the winds rushing out at height like a big chimney. So imagine the smoke going up a chimney. Essentially that rushes out at a faster pace there. So there are two main developmental regions. And what's going to happen with the developing area of low pressure, if I switch to the 500 millibar flow, here we go. So you can see Humberto coming northwards, and what also will happen is there is an upper trough coming south from Hudson Bay, and that upper trough is also going to help to engage with the surface low, and where you get that sharpening of the upper trough digging down, you also get increased vertical ascent, i.e. Upward rising motion of the air in the trough ahead of that. And you also get increased spin or vorticity in that trough ahead of it. And this is the red markings on this trough are the vorticity, so the spin of the atmosphere, and essentially where you have that trough tightening, you get increased vertical air ascending in that trough as well. So where all that comes together, essentially you have a massive chimney in the atmosphere where the wind will essentially, the air rushes out at the top, and you get the surface pressure falling at the surface. So all that looks like it's going to come together. So Humberto loses its tropical characteristics here at around 60 degrees west by the end of tomorrow. And you can see this upper trough then starts to come south across the northeastern part of the United States and eastern Canada. And that trough essentially then will move out into the Atlantic. It does buckle for a time. And the reason it buckles is because Humberto itself is essentially buckling the trough because of its tropical energy. It does temporarily cause this upper trough to buckle a little bit, i.e. become a little bit distorted and less aligned to the flow. You can see that the initial part of the upper trough speeds on ahead of it, and that will give us some wet and windy weather in the northwest on Thursday. But the main bulk of the trough remains back out in the Atlantic, and then it's reinforced by another one coming out of northeastern Canada on Thursday. And the GFS has been pretty consistent in this. It has a reasonably good, I think, handle on events coming. It hasn't really changed its ideas very much. Some of the other models, as we'll talk about in a minute, are kind of flip-flopping between either a more southern centre and a more northern centre. The GFS has been pretty consistent in its handling, which gives me confidence that it has a good handle on the trough and the relative positions on everything where they are at present. So you see by 1800 on Thursday, this upper trough is now coming across the Atlantic. You've got good vorticity ahead of it. You've got a strong belt of southwesterly winds. And if I change that to the upper jet stream, you can see that the low by then is deepening, 989 millibars, and it's sat pretty much right under the main jet core. And what will happen if we run the sequence a little bit further on to where we got to Friday lunchtime? We see by Friday lunchtime that low pressure area is now to the northwest of Ireland, and it is now moved out onto the polar side, or the northeastern side of the jet. In this case, where it's on the northwestern side of the jet. And essentially that means it's now in its developmental left exit region. So you've got this huge push of wind from behind that's essentially then spreading out at height at 200 millibars, and that will cause the surface pressure to drop dramatically. And over a course of 24 hours, it will go down from essentially, if we look at 0600 on Friday, it's 974 millibars. By 0600 on Saturday, it is down to 946 millibars on this particular run. So that is essentially 24 plus, what did I say? 24 plus 6, about 30 millibars in 24 hours. So that's pretty impressive. That would certainly qualify as a bomb cyclone or rapid cyclogenesis, and it's fairly similar to what we saw with Storm Éowyn last year, or earlier this year rather, when it crossed into northwestern parts of Ireland, across into Scotland. The track is not dissimilar to that, but it's not going to be quite as deep. So essentially it looks like it's going to be potentially bringing some stormy weather across those northern parts. So if we look at a bit more detail of what the various different models are suggesting in terms of wind, so that gives you an idea of what is happening in the upper atmosphere, and all models really are in relative broad agreement on that. There is some differences in the handling of the jet stream, as you would expect, and there is also some differences in the handling of the model's 500 millibar trough. That's probably the main uncertainty at the moment, is the handling of that upper trough that I was showing you as it comes across the Atlantic. It isn't a particularly sharp upper trough, so there are upper troughs that you get that are much more sharp coming eastwards, that will engage the surface. Now this one it isn't that sharp, and it has got scope for potential mismatches in imagery, so i.e. versus reality. So we will have to keep an eye on that as we go through Wednesday and Thursday, just to make sure how the models firm up on the handling of that as it comes into the Atlantic basin. So let's look at some of the different solutions. So the GFS, as I mentioned earlier on, has been pretty consistent in taking a track across northwestern Ireland, across central and southern Scotland, and then into the North Sea, where essentially the jet will overrun and it will leave the low behind, stranded for a little bit of time. So it does look like the low is going to become quite slow moving in the central North Sea for a time as we go into Saturday, which will prolong the windy conditions across many northern and eastern parts of the country as we go through the weekend. So 952 millibars, it's been pretty consistent on that. If you look back at the last runs, 958 millibars, 964 millibars, for the last few runs it has been pretty consistent on where it where it suggests this storm is going to come. And just to clarify, it will be called Humberto. It will not be called Amy, as I've seen in a few places online. It will retain its original name as given to it by the National Hurricane Center, even though it is H. We don't change the name because it has been known as Humberto. It was a hurricane, and to give it respect, we essentially keep the name as it was. So essentially the GFS is pretty consistent in taking that track across Northern Ireland into southern Scotland. Some of the other models, for example, if we look at the Icon, so the Icon is again in a similar position, but it's shallower, and it has also been jumping around. It was pretty slack this morning, in pretty diffuse centre, 986 millibars across Northern Ireland. It had a much flatter, slower upper trough that I was talking about earlier, a little bit earlier there. So the Icon is not really a model that I'm following for this particular development at this time, because it is not producing a consistent story. That tells me that it hasn't got a particularly great handle on where the respective features are at the moment. If we look at the ECMWF, which should have come in by the time I look at this, we get it on here. Yeah, so if we look at the ECMWF, that again is coming in. It's actually coming in now on the 12Z run a little bit further to the northwest. So the previous run had taken it further south and was actually in slightly better agreement. The midday run, which I'm just seeing here, is coming in across northwestern parts of Scotland, 945 millibars. It's pretty deep centre. It takes it a little bit further northwest. The previous run took it again across Northern Ireland, across southern Scotland, which is the track that we were kind of beginning to see become more consistent from the models. The midday ECMWF is going to take it further northwest. The global model from the Met Office has come in further to the southwest, further to the south on this particular run. It had been further to the northwest. If we look at the winds on the UK Met Office run, let's look at the sea level pressure first. So you can see the sea level pressure comes in again across Northern Ireland, across southern Scotland. So the UK Met Office global model is actually now flipped more towards the GFS, which is a pleasing change because we've got a bit more consistency, and it was also in line with the midnight run from the ECMWF. So there is some consistency there, and that would produce the wind gusts coming in across Ireland of I think around 100 miles an hour, or just shy of 100 miles an hour off of the western coast of Ireland, so places like Macehead, down through Galway Bay, seeing winds of around 95 to potentially 100 miles an hour. I expect the UK V, if we got the UK V in, I think we have. Yes, we've got 95 miles an hour off the west coast of Ireland, coming in for 1800 hours on Friday, and then you've got 96, 97 miles an hour across the Solway Firth, across the Mull of Galloway, and the Isle of Man. So some pretty impressive wind gusts there as we go through into Friday, into Saturday. And again, the same models, the same wind gusts are also seen on the GFS. as we go into Friday. Again, we've got winds of 101 miles an hour gusts, okay, again around Galway Bay, the west coast of Ireland, really from Belmullet down through Mace Head, in that kind of area. Again, potential for some extremely destructive winds over 100 miles an hour. If this was to verify, no doubt we would have red warnings being issued by the respective Met services for that kind of wind. So, you know, this is something to take seriously. It is something not perhaps quite as ferocious as Storm Eowyn, but it is going to be, you know, if these charts verify and these models are correct, and I see no reason to doubt the solutions at this time, because, you know, they are highly respected models, and they don't get this kind of thing wrong. They might be, we're going to be talking about the exact location, and we're going to be talking about the exact track, but if these charts were to verify, we are in for some pretty potent weather with gusts of this level, of this magnitude. So it is something to take seriously. You know, remembering earlier on in this year when parts of Ireland were without power for several days. You know, so it is certainly something to be wary of. If we zoom in a little bit closer on the winds across the British Isles, and again, it's not at this stage on a Tuesday, I'm not going to spend too long talking about the you know, each of the different models and what they show. You can see that on the charts, but essentially the key point is that we have to zone in on the track, and we have to look at an area which is most likely to see the winds, the strongest winds, and at the moment that is going to be across Ireland, the Irish Sea, into northern England and southern Scotland. Now, if the track moves further to the northwest, we're going to see more of Scotland and less of northern England impacted. The track doesn't look like it's going to come further south, and if it does come further south, it will be a weaker feature because it will be on the warmer side of the jet, so it won't deepen as much. So there really isn't at this point much threat of this low pressure centre, for example, coming across the Irish Sea into Birmingham or Manchester or the Wash. That isn't going to happen because the jet is not going to move to such a degree that we're going to get that kind of deepening of a surface centre further south. So we are talking about the low pressure area either coming in across Ireland into southern Scotland and the North Sea like that. And if I get my little pen, and it works, we're either going to get a track coming in kind of here, or we're going to get a track coming in kind of here. We are not going to get a track coming in further south, just simply because of the positioning of the jet stream and the associated upper trough. So we're really talking about the strongest winds, and if I change colour, we're really talking about the strongest winds in kind of this area across Ireland. We're really talking about that kind of area. That is really the area to watch. If the low is further to the northwest, we will also have to include that part of Scotland as well. We're really not talking about the extreme winds further south. It's going to be pretty windy across Wales, the southwest of England, through the English Channel with gales, and it is going to be pretty blustery and windy, but it is really the concern for parts of Ireland, Northern Ireland, the Irish Sea, southern and central Scotland, northern England, and you know, potentially parts of central and eastern Scotland as well, that are in the firing line for some very windy weather as we go towards the end of the week, stormy weather, as you know, in fact, and we will see weather warnings be issued. I expect the first warnings to be issued tomorrow. I expect the Met Office will issue a warning for tomorrow, and I expect those, you know, as we hone in and get more detail on where the strongest of the winds are going to come, as we go through to the end of the week, we are going to find essentially, you know, as I said, we'll fine tune where the strongest winds are going to be, but it does look like we're going to see potentially gusts of 90 miles an hour, up to 100 miles an hour across this central belt of the country towards the end of the week. But I will be back hopefully with another update. As you can follow me on Twitter at PaulBlight6, and you will find my updates on there. I post when I can, when time allows, and hopefully everyone stays safe. But that's it for now. Goodbye.